What up, bruh? What up, bruh?
I like that. It was like a little call,
Right?
like a conch, just a.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And welcome to Bro Meets World.
When it's Bro Meets World.
Your boy Meets World Fancast. I'm Siege.
And I'm Tony Curtis. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well, and I'm so excited to talk about this.
You know what? I have to say, I was thrilled when I realized that we were talking about this specific episode, because this is one of those episodes I remember watching live on TGIF. Like, this is like, I remember exactly where I was, October 1998, watching this episode. Like, it really brought back memories of like my viewing experience. So that was cool.
I honestly so for me, it's so interesting because for most of you who have been listening, I go into this blind. Like, I haven't seen it since I was a child, and this hit me across. I was like, what is this episode? Who wrote this? I have so many things I want to say to the person who wrote this episode. First being thank you. But then also it was just like it came out of nowhere. And it was funny because there were like moments, we have our little pattern. I was like, oh, this will be my bruh moment, or this will be my bruh moment. And then something happened. I was like, I literally yelled, my God. So
well, there was so much too where like the show did something and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. And then like 5 minutes later, they'd be like, actually, that was like there on purpose to show like a lesson being learned. And I was like, oh,
exactly.
Okay.
This felt like the most needed self-aware version of Boy Meets World that we wanted to have.
100%. Perfectly said.
Like this episode is like, oh, this is what I thought I would be getting from Boy Meets World when we started this podcast. Like, yes. I thought that we would be doing episodes like this on a regular basis.
100%.
And we aren't, but like this is like the best version of that. Let's do our morning announcement. Because we've gotten feedback, we kind of like still responses to our whole poll that we did on Maitland Ward's character Rachel going down into the basement, and there's lots of course feedback about the actress actually entering into the adult film industry. Someone pointed out that she actually wrote a book, and I haven't read the book yet, but they really encouraged us to read that book and then just see her opinion of it. I think that she's also, I've been told, doing a adult film parody of Boy Meets World soon.
Amazing.
As well. So I mean, I think all of the again, you will not get me to judge anyone in the adult film industry, because that is an art form, and it is actually like a challenge in and of itself. It's work. But I'm also thinking it's very interesting that she is kind of like taking ownership of both her past and her present. And I'm sure there are so many trolls and people who have opinions. So I just wanted to, like, you know, actually applaud her for that.
Yeah. Okay. So I just looked it up, and her memoir is Rated X: How Porn Liberated Me from Hollywood. I just found a quick article about it, and she goes on to say that everything to do with my storyline was kind of sexual, and no one tried to hide it.
Ooh.
There was always an undertone or innuendo, some jokes that junior high boys might make as they compared dick sizes next to each other in their locker rooms. So, I mean, she has a very clear opinion about how her character was treated. She goes on to say, Rachel was the only character to consistently take her clothes off. I was asked to try on lingerie for the producers in their office. This happened more than once. So
yeah, see, exactly. And that's exactly what I kind of expected. And wow. Especially when we get into this episode that we're coming into, I'm really happy that she is, like, I don't want to say self-aware, but like that she's calling it out, so to speak, because I think as we watch it so far removed as two men, we can be like, yo, I mean, I get it, but like, this is a little much.
Yeah, it's a little much. And I will say that it feels like it's like the show is responding to it in a certain way. I don't know. We'll just have to see how it plays out. But the fact that she
Absolutely.
said that this kind of happened throughout her entire duration of the show is kind of really telling as well.
The last thing that I wanted to say, which I feel will be kind of related to this, is a very long time listener by the name of Bonnie. I'm just keep it vague. Hi, Bonnie. But
Hey.
long time listener, a fan of ours, Bonnie's asked about they wanted to know how we felt about the relationship of Cory and Sean, something that we've been talking about. But they were saying there's this idea of like going back and listening to both our pod and Pod Meets World, this kind of like tension between Cory and Sean and their relationship, and how, you know, like it always did kind of have that like homosexual undertones to it. But now, like, also we have like these kind of dynamics between Eric and Jack. And I don't know, like, we're two men. What do you think about the idea of, like, of course, having two friends be very close to each other, but like it seems on this television show they really don't know how to blur like marriage those two male characters without making it kind of a tension as well. Am I making sense?
Yeah, and I will have to say that like I always read Sean and Corey's friendship to be more brotherly than anything else, and that in direct comparison to Jack and Eric, who have a ton of like undertones going on there. I never really read that, but I will say this: that listening to Pod Meets World, it's apparent that Ben and Ryder didn't immediately hit it off. And like it kind of took a little while for them as actors to kind of build a bond. And so maybe part of that was just that like their chemistry kind of evolves with the show, and we're just
Mm,
kind of picking up on that chemistry kind of developing.
mm.
That can be my understanding of that, but hey, this is just my opinion.
That's very interesting, and I love that you said that, because maybe that is what we've always been picking up on. It's like, oh, we're seeing people actually grow and get close together, and like like as viewers, we don't know the behind the scenes stuff, so we're like, oh wow, this is really starting to click, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
same, they feel the same. I will say to me, because even when we do like clip shows or any kind of look back, there is kind of comparing Cory and Sean's relationship to like a married couple.
Yeah.
But I think that to me is more of the dynamic there. It's like they're more of a married couple and they have that level of like intimacy. Whereas with Eric and Jack, that's where we get like more of this like almost like they're like a dating, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, totally. And we kind of have to also put things in perspective from a time period, because like we always kind of mention, like in the 90s there weren't really a lot of examples of two male friends having intimacy in a way that wasn't compared to a traditional male female relationship. So it was one of those things where I think they were kind of like limited in their time period. Like when we get to the 2000s, when we get to like shows like Scrubs and Psych,
Yeah.
the things that we always kind of reference as like the after the spawns of this Boy Meets World bromance.
Yeah.
They don't really get into it like that. And I don't feel like they have to, because there's this understanding that, oh no, two men can be friends. And part of that is Joey and Chandler. Part of that is Cory and Sean. Part of that
Yeah.
is these friendships that happened in the early 90s, where like they played as almost husband and wife, but really it was just that bickering of intimacy was the only way to communicate to the audience that these people have like a family like relationship. And so I think that has a bit to play,
I love
a bit of
that.
a role to play as well.
I love that analysis. Okay, so thank you guys for taking a little moment for us to do more in an announcement. Now let's get into this episode.
Yeah, I
All
love
right,
this
you
episode. Okay.
you
Yeah.
gonna tell me about it?
All right. Tell us about it. Oh, Corey is mediocre, but no one ever told him, so now it's time for him to insult his family and still Morgan's time to shine.
Ooh, very very well done. And oh my God, so much to say about this. Okay, thank you guys. This is season 6, episode 5, Better Than Average Cory. Uh, After Cory is introduced to art prodigy Alexandra Nikita, he develops an inferiority complex and blames his lack of skills on his average father. In a B storyline, Eric and Jack compete for Rachel's attention again.
Yep.
I actually, so for those of you who don't know, I usually grab like these kind of story synopses from Wikipedia, and I love that it just straight up was like Cory has an inferiority complex and we got to deal with that. And so like that, and also I love that it's called Better Than Average Cory. I was like, is he better at all?
First impressions, let's talk about it. Just the first.
My God. My first impressions of this episode is that it really, I'll say this, it impressed me. I was like, from the very beginning, when Sean and Angela come in, and you know where I'm going with this, where they're like, hey, Sean got accepted to
photography program.
Accepted his photography program, and I was like, "Oh, we're bringing that back." I actually just loved it because I was like, so often, especially with this show, they'll pick up a thread and just let it die. So I was like, "Oh, they do it again. They will do it again." But just to see that kind of thread and be like, "Oh, wait, Sean is still pursuing the thing that he was supposed to be pursuing," that was actually kind of refreshing, and I was like, "Oh, applause!" And then they were like, Angela got an A on her paper. Go ahead.
Maintaining Black identity when you have 3 very white friends. Which, by the way, I was, as soon as I heard that, I was like, I need to read this essay. Also, I feel like that's kind of the show I needed growing up. Like, I wish that was a show in the 90s because that would have been really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think like we could talk about it, like, because this is you and me, and I think that is one of the things that I love the most. I was like, I love the self-awareness. I don't know who was responsible for writing that line, but you understood that person understood.
And just like, again, like not glossing over the fact that Angela's Black. Like, it just, this like blind colorism thing was so popular at a time where it was just like, well, no, at the same time, like, this woman has an identity. We talked about this with the purse episode. Nothing in that purse felt like it belonged to a Black woman. So it was just the fact that they're actually like saying like, hey, we're not completely blind to this is refreshing.
It was very refreshing. And I was just like, okay, again, in the beginning, I was watching this and I was like, I like this. I'm here for it. I was a little confused why we were on a field trip in college.
Okay, all right. I have to talk about that too. And you know, I kind of already gave my first impressions at the beginning of this episode a little bit, but the main takeaway is that I really enjoyed this episode, but there were some things that were just kind of like a back and forth. And one of it was the fact that last week, I went and found the IMDb air dates. We were at October like 13th last week. We're at October 23rd this week. 1 week has gone by since Dean was like, Feeny, I would really prefer you as a colleague instead of a student. This motherfucker is already leading a field trip. Why? Why are college students on a field trip? They don't take field trips in college. They tell you, hey, go to this museum and write a paper about it. What are we doing here?
On top of which, you made a very good point. The school year has already started. What happened? Like this?
What's going on?
Like,
I know
did they take away someone's class and give?
Yes, yeah, it had to happen because we know how hard it was for Cory to change classes.
That's what I was gonna say. That's exactly
so Feeny must have took someone else's class that they just all happen to have had together. Oh my God, this is so ridiculous.
You bring up a really good point because you're right. Like, had they had like Feeny's come to term moment either at the end of the semester or whatever, like that would like also. It's not hard to have Feeny still be in class and be on the field trip with them. Like, we've established that Feeny was taking courses with them. How hard would it have been to have literally one other character play the teacher and then Feeny's there? Like, it wouldn't have been
the dean come back and have Feeny be with the kids, just doing like a, hey, we got to sign this assignment. We're at this museum. Bam, we're ready to go. That makes so much
Absolutely.
more sense. But no, we're just going to gloss right over Feeny back as a teacher. Boom.
He took someone's tenureship. I don't know what happened, but like,
I know what happened. I know what happened with him and the dean that got him that job.
Ooh, look at Feeny.
Is there Mr. Gump, Mrs. Gump?
That is such a you reference, and I love it. Okay.
Oh my god.
I thought that was amazing. Then let's talk about one we haven't really had to do in a while, but let's do a roll call.
Oh, a roll call, yeah.
Alexandra Nikita.
So Alexandra Nikita is a real life artist who plays a cameo as a child artist prodigy on the show. And the thing that was always so fucking hard for me to accept about this episode when watching it live and rewatching it is this thing of just like, oh yeah, her and Morgan are the exact same age.
I love that you said that. I love that you said that. Because she was like, you have a sister my age. And by the way, we haven't seen Morgan in like a while. So I'm like, oh, okay. We're going to see like teenage Morgan. Like for some reason that's in my head. They show a 10-year-old and then a 16-year-old. And then they're just like, they're the same age. They're practically
the same
twins.
age. She looks closer to Topanga than she does to Morgan. And I have to throw this out there. The thing that bugs me so much about this is at the museum, Cory insults Alexandra to her face. Little girl, I'm 18 years old. Was I too mean to the little girl? But just the mention of, oh, I have a sister your age. Oh, I'll come home with you. Why? Why did you just come home with this man? Are your parents still involved? You're apparently 10 years old. So like, what's going on? Where are your parents?
I love that you said that because later on in the episode, like Alexandra is still at their house. And I was like, what is going on here? You were just on a tour of like your your work. And now all of a sudden, like you were also Morgan says that you were on the Rosie O'Donnell show. Are you not like doing the press junket? Like what is going on here? Do you have responsibility?
Do you have an agent? Is someone who is responsible for you?
It's just insanity.
Well, like, I will throw this out there, and this actually blew my mind. That despite the height difference, Morgan is actually 2 months older. The actress is 2 months older than the actress who plays Alexandra.
Really? So they are the same age.
They actually are the same age. Lindsay Ridgway, I think it is the actress who plays Morgan. She caps out at like 5 feet tall. She's just a shorty.
So they're the exact same age.
They really are the same age. It's just that I think Alexandra is tall for her age and Morgan is short for her age. So like it doesn't play on screen at all.
But
like,
how
give
old?
her an apple
do you
box.
know how old they are in?
You know what? I do not know how old they are.
In this episode.
No, I don't.
All right, I'll give you some time to look that up. But I'm only asking because like maybe is it the fact that they're having Morgan play such a like the thing is they infantilize Morgan so often that we the audience don't know how old.
That's one of the things I wrote down, that like you have no idea that her and Alexandra are the same age, because as soon as we're introduced to Morgan again, this chick is still coloring at the kitchen table like she's been doing for 6 seasons straight. Like, how is this the same girl who is the same age as this otherworldly Rosie O'Donnell star? Like, how are they the same age? Why would they have her coloring at the table? Like, age and maybe her, please.
That's the thing for me. It's like, so first of all, like egg on my face, they actually are the same age. And
they are 13.
They are 13. And that's what I was going to say. The thing is, if they are both 13, they have given Morgan no indications that she's 13. There's no indications that she's entered like her teenage years. And so that's why it's such a shock. Because
Cory was making out with Topanga by the time he was 13.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's no indication that Morgan has actually aged in any way, shape, or form. As far as I can tell, she's like still 8 years old. So it's such a kind of shock to the system because they don't even say like, oh, they don't even acknowledge, oh, we are the same age. Hey,
Yeah.
you're 13, I'm 13. They just say you have a sister my age, and you're like,
So
am
vague.
I? Yeah. What does that mean? Where are we at? And how old are you? Like,
Yeah. The other thing, okay, so the other thing that kind of bugged me about that scene, just while we're there, is Sean shows up to the Matthews like, "Hey, Core, what you doing?" I'm like, he doesn't live there anymore. Why are you showing up to the Matthews house in the middle of the night, just being like, "Oh, Core, you're here. What's up?"
we'll go there. You went a little too fast,
I'm
and I want to
sorry.
go
I'm
back to that.
sorry.
No, you're fine, because we were talking about Alexandra, and the whole thing is, let's talk about her entrance, which is, again, you have. I think that it's very interesting that Cory gives his interpretation of the art piece, and
Mhm.
it's wrong, which is, there's something to be said there about white men who speak very confidently about things they know nothing about. But the idea that uh Alexandra would come up and be like, actually, this is what the piece is about. Again, she just doesn't look anywhere close to her age in this.
Mm-mm.
So I was like, is this just another college student?
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Like she just doesn't look 13, which is fine, but the story and the script clearly understands that she's 13, which means Cory speaking down to her, even though it's equally bad, it actually makes a little bit more sense, because
Sure.
he is seeing someone Morgan's age. But as a viewer, I'm like, why are you speaking like this to any woman? Like,
Yeah, sure.
like,
You
and
know
that's why
what? I
to
had
me it still works, because I'm like, who are you? Like, now you're insulting your one of your peers and calling her little girl.
yeah.
Like, even if she was 15, 16, who are you? But go ahead.
Yeah, I had the same issue watching the new Orphan movie, which I recommended as homework last week, simply because they use a 30-year-old actress to play a 10-year-old girl. You really kind of have to just like make that switch in your brain. You have to have a little bit of imagination when you're watching. Especially there's a scene right before they have the talent show, and I'm not going to skip to it that scene, but they're standing right next to each other, and I'm like, dude, just put her on the box, just put her on the soapbox. Like, how hard would it be to make the height difference a little less distracting, so that we can pay
Exactly.
attention to the story?
Absolutely. But going back into it, the what I thought would be my bruh moment is Cory's just kind of like demeaning of this stranger that's like just stranger. And then I got your nose, and I'm like, what again? This
Mm-mm.
is this would be inappropriate in any situation.
Yeah, because again, to your point, it looks like he's playing "I Got Your Nose" with a college student. Like
Yeah.
that's the only like visual I have, and it's just it's weird that like Feeny's like participating with his bullshit. Like, oh, give her nose back, Mr. Matthews. Like, what are you doing?
It is and it isn't, because one, there's this moment where Cory goes and says to Sean, "Am I average?" Sean goes, "What now?" And I was like,
Yeah,
that's just kind of like is the feeling of this entire episode. Everyone is done with Cory's bullshit, and
totally.
there's just like this moment where even Feeny is like, "You know what? Go ahead, you do you."
Not only is everyone done with Corey's bullshit, but it just also feels like, and I kind of said this in a previous episode, that Corey's just getting wacky in college, right? Like he's just getting so much sillier than we've seen him. Like when I think about the episodes that we had last season, with like everything that happened between him and Topanga and Lauren, like really dramatic storylines, I just haven't seen a super comedic, wacky Cory in a really long time. And sometimes the way he acts wacky feels out of place for his age. And maybe I'm like just like he's 18, like he's an 18-year-old kid. Like I have to remember he's a kid, but sometimes it just seems like it's kind of odd how wacky he is and cartoony he is compared to how the show has painted him in the past few seasons.
I don't know. I feel like this, especially for someone who's been like watching the show, I felt like this episode, like I said, it gave me what I wanted in terms of the show itself. Just kind of felt like they were being like, yeah, we're doing this again.
Yeah,
Cory's doing this again. Cory's behaving
sure.
this way again. It's just like
He's
he's
making everything about him again.
again. Yeah, like it literally just felt like whoever wrote this episode got it. And they're like, yes, this like isn't it frustrating how people like this, white men like this,
Mm.
just continually feel entitled and emboldened to be this way again and again and again and see nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Like, again, from the very beginning, I will say one of the first people who acknowledged that this is just kind of like a pattern is Sean. And they're
Mhm.
just like, you know what? Oh, God, we're doing this again. Sean's like,
Well,
haven't we outgrown this?
my favorite was Sean telling Topanga, like, oh, Cory's in there kind of like searching through the caverns of his soul. And Topanga's like, no, not the caverns.
Yeah, I did that was funny. She's like, oh, again, all I'm saying is this episode seemed to be a little bit self-aware in the sense of who they were dealing with and the type of person Cory is.
Yeah.
And Cory does kind of have these identity crisis moments. It's very common for him, but when he does, it's none of it's like really based in logic. It's just kind of based in drama that he's created for himself.
Always.
Yeah, which is why Feeny was like, I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy this.
Yeah. Feeny's great in this episode because I love that Feeny at the art gallery and throughout the whole episode, people are just like, Cory, you're great at a lot of stuff. And he's like what? And everyone's like,
Don't press me on this.
Don't press me. I'm not supposed to lie. Tell me what to do.
Because this is a show of the 90s and Cory is our protagonist, it still features Cory, and they don't know how to do this episode without focusing on him. But it's also very interesting in the sense that they realize that Cory's the least interesting person of their cast.
They did such an amazing job because you're right, because this could have just been a recycled episode of Cory relearning a lesson he's already learned. But because they double down and they make a joke of it, because they have him saying, my room is a shrine to my mediocre life as he leans against a poster of celery.
Yeah.
Fucking incredible. Like, that's the self-awareness that you're talking about, where they're just like, no, we know that we've done this. We know that he's mediocre, but we're going to lean into this. You got a trophy for going to fat camp. You were never fat. What's up?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like, really call him on everything that made him feel like his mediocrity meant something. Just like call him out on it. And I just love it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I would say you mentioned Scrubs earlier, and I think that in a different episode or in a different time of television, we would have gotten the baton handed off. We would have learned, this would have been a Morgan-centric episode. They would have been like, yeah, we acknowledge that Cory's not really bringing anything to the table. Let's go adventure with other people. Angela's writing this really interesting paper. Let's go see what she's up to. Sean,
Morgan can sing.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
find that out.
Let's do these things, but instead it becomes an exploration on white men blaming other people for their mediocrity. And I'm so excited to talk about
I'm here for this conversation. I'm here for it. And they handle it really well. That's the thing, is that, like, I have no notes on how they went about handling Cory's issues in this, because everyone's just like, you're privileged and we're going to call you out on it. Because midway, and I know we're not there yet, but midway through the episode, it takes a shift from I'm mediocre to, hey, check your privilege, appreciate what you have, and appreciate how hard your generations of family have worked to get you here. Love it. Like, it's just a great pivot. So I know we're not there yet, but I just it handles it really well.
Let's move there. After we've just invited this stranger over into the house, whose parents apparently have no problem with her going home with strange men that she met at the 13-year-old, by the way.
Yeah.
She just met at the random museum and didn't even go back with Cory and Feeny. Just went back with the 18-year-old college boy.
Would make more sense to go back to Feeny since he lives there.
But anyway, now that we are back into the house, we do get like this exploration of Cory and the family, and Cory not feeling like he's exceptional.
Well, he goes as far, like, the shift that happens is, like, he gets mad at his parents for not, like, helping him become a prodigy in his own right. He's like, yo, why didn't you guys keep these ukulele lessons going? Like, I could have been so. By the way, when Sean and Cory come down the stairs, and there's this moment where Cory's like, I could have been a ukulele star and you never supported me or something, and Sean plays a little ditty on the on the ukulele, and they give Alan a mischievous look. I'm like, their chemistry has come so far. Like their timing is so great in that moment.
Absolutely, because again, in that moment, I love that you called that out, because in that moment, what we're seeing is Sean being like, "Yeah, it's one of those moments again."
Yeah, it's that kind of episode, guys. I'm here
and
for this.
Alan and Amy are like, "Are we doing this?" Like, and they're like, "Oh, Cory's having one of his moments," and
Yeah.
everyone seems to be aware of it. And I just thought that was amazing. Also, in that scene, I just wanted to point out, if we're talking about consistency, what is Sean doing in that scene? Do you know? Sean is eating pudding, which goes back to my whole thing of Sean would be enthusiastic about Cory bringing in a trunk of pudding to college. Like the idea, like I just wanted to call that back, because when Cory was like, "Hey, I have a whole trunk full of pudding," they had Sean be like, "I'm too cool for this," and I was like, "No. The Sean that we know would be down for a trunk
I,
full of pudding."
I also think the show thinks it's like maybe this is like the actors having fun with it, but like when they don't have lines, they're just like eating a random piece of food, like
Yeah,
banana boy, you're promoted, like that kind
yeah.
of shit. Like I think they just have fun with food props.
They do have fun with food props, but I just wanted to point out that Sean loves pudding, and I was right to call it out. But anyway,
You're right. You're right. Okay, so we're
I'm just
at the
talking about
point where
pudding.
like Cory is like confronting his parents about his mediocrity. And here's the thing I want to say. Before I beat up Cory too much about like being mediocre and like expecting his mediocrity to take him places in life, like I do feel like the reason why the show kind of resonates this episode is because there is a very human aspect of, did my parents set me up for the success that I feel like I deserve in life, or the success I want in life? Was I properly set up to be my best self by my parents? And almost like this little bitterness to like, oh, they didn't invest in lessons, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, like all these like things that like comparing yourself to other people. I think there's something very human about that, and I feel like I'm not mad at Cory for having some of these instincts, because they're instincts that I've also had from time to time. Like, did my parents send me to the best schools? Did I get the best, like, healthcare? Like, all that shit. Like, it's just questions that I feel like are normal to ask, especially when you're 18. So that's why I'm like, I give Cory some shit, but at the same time, like, there is a purpose to this episode, which I feel like is played out really well.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I completely agree with you. I watched this episode being like, "Oh no, I remember that moment. I remember being like, oh, you didn't encourage me to stick with the piano. You didn't uh you didn't encourage the strings to make me a better version of this. Why didn't you?" And as you get older, you're like, "Oh, because you were tired. You had
Yeah.
other things that you were doing, and you're only human. And then if I didn't want to do it, you weren't gonna fight me." Like when he was like, "Why didn't you give me a paintbrush when I was 2?" She was like, "You were more preoccupied with the potty, and
Yeah.
that was important to you. That's what you wanted to do." And
Yeah.
guess what? I had a 2-year-old and a young Eric. Like that's
Yeah.
why.
Eric was in the dryer. Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I think it's very, as you said, it is very much almost a milestone in growing up, of being like, "Hey, my parents didn't do everything that they were supposed to do to help me be the best version of me." But what happens is that Cory takes it a step further,
Oh,
and
as he always does. Yeah.
straight up disrespects.
Yeah.
Like first of all, all right. So for those of you who have watched the episode, you will know that there's this moment in this scene where Cory goes, "Why didn't you help me be more and better?" And Alan
Yeah.
goes, "Better than what?" Like Alan's literally like, "Better than what? Like, what do you want?" He
Yeah.
goes, "Better than this." And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
That
That's the
like that
turn.
enough? That enough? I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I thought we were good there. And then Alan says, "You mean better than me?" And I was like, "Oh." And Cory goes, "Yeah."
Yes. Better than you. I was
And I
raised to be
was
average because you're average, bro. I was like, what?
I literally screamed. My fiance came from the other room and was like, "What is it?" I rewound it and played it again, and he was like, "Damn!" Like
Yeah.
it's just
It's worlds apart from the Cory Allen relationship we saw in season 1, where like he saw his dad like working and fixing the sink, and he was like, oh, my dad's my superhero. Like, there was so much respect and appreciation he had for his dad. And for him, in front of Sean, by the way, who was raised in a trailer without a family, to say, obviously better than this shit, better than this house, better than this life. I was just like, wow, like, you're really just lacking so much self-awareness in that moment.
Cory's lacking of self-awareness is another thing I wanted to applaud this episode of.
Yeah.
Because it is very much Cory to be this bold in his audacity.
Yeah.
And I was like, also, this is very, very much a moment that I feel could only happen on this show. Because name another show at this time where the TV dad would allow you to just disrespect him in this way. I was like, Tool Time wouldn't accept this.
Danny Tanner would accept it. I feel like he's taken a few screamings at by his girls on his episodes.
Maybe Danny Tanner was literally the only other one I could think of.
Yeah,
Uncle Phil ain't doing this.
Like, Uncle Phil would never. Uncle Phil would fucking never accept this.
Like, that's what I was like thinking of this, and I was like, in what
Claire
world?
Huxtable wouldn't accept this.
Claire, that was another thing. I was like, oh, we talking.
She wouldn't even accept you talking to the dad. Like, if she would have stepped in.
Amy being like, Cory. I was like, not the Amy I know.
No.
Who are you talking to?
Yeah,
exactly. Like, first of all, like, in my house, why your friend is eating my food?
You're still living. You're still upstairs in our house talking shit about it. Get that celery poster out of here, bro.
I just was like, it was amazing. But then also, again, if you want to go, like, I want to get back to Alan, but the next scene or whatever, we're back in Cory's room, and Cory's like, he understands that he's going too far now. He didn't stop himself in the moment.
Which I appreciated. I appreciated that moment of like, I said something, I went too far, and now like I'm remorseful.
Guilt trip.
I'm ruminating about what I said. I'm realizing I hurt my parents' feelings, which is a hard thing as a kid to come to terms with. Like, I liked that he had that moment of realization. It felt very similar to I hit my dad.
Yeah,
in the basketball episode that they had.
Yeah, and also to that point, I will say I'm looking at this as a 30-something, but there were times as a teenager where I did say things that completely hurt my parents' feelings, and I said so unapologetically because in the moment I was angry and I did feel vindicated. So I guess that's also very true. But
I feel terrible for some of the things I said to my single mother who was working her hardest, just being like, why couldn't you be better at this? Like, what the dude, shut up. Like, and it's those things that you don't think about when you're a kid, because you're very selfish when you're a kid. Like, that's the thing, like, we give Cory a hard time with, but his selfishness is innate to adolescence. Like, it's part of it. Absolutely. You're in your own world.
Absolutely. And I think that I love that we're having this conversation because as upsetting as it is to watch, it is very true. And I kind of want to give the episode credit for showing both sides of it, both showing Cory having the audacity to say such a thing, but then also showing how his parents feel about what he said and their response to it. Like, it is complex. I wish it was done like a little bit better, but I do think that it's the idea that they would even show both things is kind of really revolutionary.
Yeah. And you know what? One thing we kind of skipped over, I just want to mention it real fast, is that I love how the progression of Cory's motivation was he was comparing himself to peers, not feeling like he was where his peers were. And because of that came self-doubt, which then came to like resenting his parents. But the initial thing that caused it was he was like looking at this artist who was a world-renowned artist at the age of 13, which I also think is a very human moment. Like, I feel like every now and then I see those memes online about how like, oh, Michael Jackson made Thriller when he was 25 years old, and then I turned 25 and I'm like, oh, I didn't make the biggest album of all time. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I feel like that's a very normal thing to feel.
For me, it's the whole, and I think we've said this before, it's when I realized I was too old to be on the real world. That was where I was like,
Never
Oh,
wanted to, but
yeah, but like I should still have the option. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I'm older than anyone on the real world. I'm older than anyone. Like when you watch
Yeah.
reality TV shows now, you're like, oh, like that's why you're doing all these things. You're young enough to go on a reality show. Like,
Yeah. And even the 2020 version of this is just like social media. It's comparing yourself to friends, it's comparing yourself to young prodigies like these celebrities and musicians who are achieving great things at a young age, athletes who are getting multi-million dollar deals when they're 23 years old. Like it's a hard thing not to ask that question sometimes. So I do appreciate this show kind of showing a version of that and showing how it plays into Cory's evolution in this episode, because it actually is kind of a really cool story arc of I don't feel like I'm as good as this person. I don't feel like I like myself. Oh, who's to blame? My parents are to blame. No, I'm to blame. I need to respect what I have. Like it's a great
exactly.
arc.
That arc, absolutely. But I do want to say, I don't want to gloss over the fact that there is some misogyny also. It's not just that it's a 13-year-old prodigy, it's that it's a 13-year-old girl. And the reason why I
Yeah.
say that is that they make it very clear in the beginning that Cory's like, oh, this little girl. Like, and
Yeah.
there's so much time spent on the fact that Alexandra is a young girl and that Cory hasn't done anything, that he felt like his sister could be this person.
But again, the show does a great job of like checking him, of just being like, oh, you think you're going to talk down to this little girl? She's achieved more than you fucking ever will. Like, I love that. Like, they did a good job with it.
But then also you get where it comes from, because there's a moment where Alan is just like, you think that Alexandra doesn't feel bad when there's like better pay, and you're like, yo,
Yeah.
this is a guest in your house and you're insulting
No.
her. It's just, again, it's this idea of uh, we can't escape it, and I think it's really important. There is just this moment of the white male ego
Mm.
being needed to be checked,
Sure,
and I
sure.
think that the privileged white male ego on top of that,
Well,
like,
yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought up the privilege aspect, because in that scene when they're back in the dorm and Cory feels bad, Sean's like, I told my dad he was average once and he was thrilled. And I thought that even though that just plays as a joke, it's such a great way of showing perspective, of showing class differences, of showing how, like, to Alan and his dad, to be average was a dream. And so to say that to Chet was like a compliment, but to say it to Cory is an insult. Love that.
absolutely. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about this entire episode is, for those, and for some context, everyone has to understand that, like, this is something that a lot of privileged white men were dealing with. It's the whole point of Fight Club and Office Space
Mm,
and The Matrix. You have all of these well-to-do white men who are like, I've made it. I don't have any other real complications other than the fact that I'm wealthy and white, but I'm not as wealthy as I could be. I'm not
mm,
as great as other people seemingly are. And this achievement of not having to struggle isn't enough.
yeah.
And like you said, there are people like Chet where I laughed, because even though Chet isn't in this episode, the mere idea of Chet being called average and him being thrilled, I could see
Made
it
me
in
so
my
happy.
head,
Yeah.
and I loved it, because Chet would absolutely love. He would absolutely
Yeah.
feel like he has accomplished something
I
by.
still remember his performance. The actor does such a great job, and we see him in a few episodes again too. But um, his performance when he becomes janitor and he brings home his paycheck for the first time, and he's so proud. I'm just like, yes, of course he would be thrilled to be called average. Like that makes sense for his character. I love it.
Absolutely. And so I thought that was really, really great. But I also like, have they don't really go too far into it, but there's
Mm-mm.
this moment where Angela is like, hey, and I'm like, oh, here we go with the black people making white people feel better thing. But they also like give her a cat where Angela's like, look, I'm just trying to make you happy. I
Yeah.
don't like, don't press me
I don't
on
know what
this.
to say. You know what? There is something in that scene that I wanted to say, which was that Cory's lamenting to his friends about how he hurt his dad and what he's going through. And he's like, you guys all know what you're good at, and I have no idea. But the problem is that we don't know what they're all good at. Sean apparently is good at photography, but he ends up becoming a writer. Okay. Angela's good at
Good at
writing,
being
and we
black.
Yeah,
like
good. Yeah, like apparently, like, are we supposed to believe she's a good writer because she aced an essay? I just thought they were complimenting her good grade. That doesn't tell us anything about her. We still don't know what any of these people are majoring in. We don't know what Topanga's good at. She's good in academics, but that's really broad. It's really
yeah,
vague. So
yeah, you're
it's
right. Like
like
I was
Cory is looking
expecting
for
that
his
moment.
purpose, and these kids don't have one either, really. So what's the problem?
Cory was looking in, like, for me it was very interesting because um as you said, I kind of expected them to like list off the different things that Cory thought they were good at, and they don't. And I was like, okay, so where are we go? Like
Yeah.
what is this? But I also love the idea of them going to be like, hey, you're gonna go and apologize to your father because that's exactly the type of person you are and your father is. So you're
Yeah.
gonna go apologize to your father, and your father's going to forgive you because that's also one of the ways in which you're privileged. You're privileged enough to say something like that to your father and walk out with all of your teeth. You know what? And Alan's the
Well,
type of person who uh will understand you, and that's not something that everyone has, and that makes you above average.
yeah.
But then they open the door and Alan's just there, and I was like, I also like that. Like, again, as
Well,
someone who
that
did not watch this episode, I was like, was not aware of this episode. I love that Alan was like, no, 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 I'm not waiting on you. You're coming with me. We're solving this right now. Go ahead.
which is honestly, if you remember back, exactly what he does in the Raging Cory episode. He's at Sean's apartment. He's lamenting about hitting his dad. And he opens his door and his dad's there and is like, "You're coming with me." And they end up on a plane. So it is this habit of like this. And again, it's almost like I don't want to beat the show up for like showing us patterns because in a way showing us similar struggles over and over again is how we understand the relationship between Cory and Alan. This is how we're understanding their relationship to be. They like each other, they get along, but every now and then Cory steps too far and Alan has to check him. And I appreciate seeing that from a son father relationship on a sitcom.
Yeah, no, and again, and I like that Alan takes Cory to his old neighborhood, and there
We
is
finally
this.
see Philly. We finally see Philly. I don't know what set this is, but it made it look more like Philadelphia than anything else in this fucking show.
What's interesting is, hey, I felt like we've seen this block before. I feel like there's like a moment where it's either outside Turners or it's something to do with Sean. I remember that
No,
moment.
I think it was the Boy Meets Real World episode of season 5 where they're like, "Oh, this is the apartment me and Jack lived in together."
Yeah,
And we were
exactly.
like, "Wait, you guys lived in an apartment together? What's the history?" Like we had all these questions about timeline.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to talk about. I was like, I knew it looked familiar, but either way, there is something because every now and then the show is like, oh hey, we've actually gotten a glimpse into Alan's past. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember Alan's mom being just kind of a wanderlust and him not being able to rely on her.
Sure.
Alan having to go into the military in order to pay for college or school. You know, like there is this whole thing of like we have very interesting characters with Amy
Mm-hmm.
and we just don't really get to live in them. But this is a moment where I'm like,
Yeah.
I really do love this idea of Alan being like, no, this is where I'm from. Like the fact that my son can feel like I he's so average, he's never had to worry about things in his life that he just takes it for granted. I mean, I guess I did my job, but also at what cost? I was like, yo, that's very, very interesting.
That's such a deep concept coming from a parenting perspective of you want to give your kids more than you have, but how do you do that without them taking it for granted? How can they appreciate without having the compare and contrast of I didn't used to live in a big house, but now I do when they've lived in that house their whole life? Like it's hard, it's a hard lesson to teach. And him taking, Cory to this old place where his dad used to work, giving him some insight on the history is how you can overcome that. But it was really nice to see the show tackle it and to see Alan going about doing it the right way, just being like, hey, you think middle class is nothing. I want you to see what middle class looked like from here. Like, this is it.
Exactly. Exactly. Because that's the thing. Like you and I have talked about this. Like the idea of like them having that house. That I mean, like his own friend is someone who is
Yeah.
very, very much like, yo, I dream of having what you
Mm-hmm.
have. I dream of having what you have with your family, having what you have in terms of lifestyle. Like that's another thing. I was looking at this being like, Cory's not paying for college right now.
Yeah.
Cory is on scholarship, or his parents are paying for him to be in college right now. Sean is the one who actually like
Yeah.
has to pay to be there, and Cory just takes all of that for granted. And it's really just amazing to have the show acknowledge that and be like, hey, by the way, this was someone who was raised as a privileged white guy, and he's taking that for granted, not realizing literally everyone else around him does not have the same story.
And it honestly would have been really interesting. And I know the show only has so much time, and I really do appreciate how they used every minute of the show. So I know there's like limitations, but it would have been interesting to see the perspective of Topanga, Sean, and Angela saying like, hey, let's actually give you some perspective of how fortunate you actually are. Let's give you some perspective from us. Angela and Sean, our parents are broken up. Topanga, like, I don't live with
Her
my parents.
parents,
I don't see
yeah,
it. Like, they didn't even come to my graduation. Like, like we could talk about how you have so many like great things going on. And from the perspective of his friends and his peers, it would have been interesting to hear that. Even if Sean just said like one or two things of just like, I would kill to have my own room where I can hang a celery poster, like something like that. Like it's meaningful to these other characters, but we don't hear their inner dialogue about it.
a room to go back to. Like
Yeah.
for me, it was something that I very often think of is the fact that like my childhood home isn't there anymore. I don't
Same.
have a childhood home to go back to. So the
Same.
idea that Cory does, like my fiance recently had to sell his parents' home, and it was such a big thing for him. And I was like, yeah, but like, do you realize how great it was that you could revisit that for so long?
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
it was something that like I can't do that. Like, and this is something that a lot of people, especially black and brown people, just never get the opportunity to do. They don't have like a childhood bedroom to go back to. And the fact that your parents still allow you a room, a space, that something that gets to maintain as yours well into adulthood is unique.
It's such a I like I'm sorry, I know this is kind of separate from the story, but I'm so glad you brought this up because sometimes like when life gets hard, like there is something in my core that's like, oh, I wish I could just go home. Like I wish I could just go to
Yes.
my home. I wish I can go to like my like high school bedroom essentially and
Yeah.
just like have my mom make me dinner and just like things just be like okay for a little bit. But like I have no childhood home to go back to. My mom has since
Exactly.
moved. That all my memories of that place are gone, as with many black and brown people. We didn't own, we rented. So we stayed in
Yeah.
a lot of different places. I have a lot
Yep.
of different bedrooms. And
Yep.
so there's no like home base. And like that
Exactly.
would be like such a privilege that I didn't even consider until you mentioned it. Like, wow, like how cool would that be for Sean to have like, oh, I'm gonna go home for the weekend. I want to like sleep in my bed for the weekend. He doesn't have that. Cory does. So
Exactly.
it's interesting.
And I think to kind of like tie it all in together, I think what this episode is showing, and what this episode is doing is that there's something in the air at this point in time in the 90s where being average is an insult. And it's like, no, I was like, Cory's like, when he has that moment in the kitchen, he's like, "You made me average." I was like, "Well, you're an above average asshole right now." Like if you
Yeah.
want to talk about not being average, this is above average assholery.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of kind of shitting on the progress your family has made and the privilege that you do have, and instead of kind of appreciating it and wanting more. There's nothing wrong with being like, hey, I want to be the best version of myself, but there is something wrong about shitting on the circumstances that other people dream of achieving.
100%. And I will say this, that is kind of a job for parents to teach their kids because kids aren't going to learn it by themselves. So like as much as we want to blame Cory, clearly this is the first time Alan's taken him to this place. He probably should have taken him there a long time ago.
I was going to say, it does remind me of, there's an episode in Mad Men where Don takes his children who up until this point have grown up in a very privileged situation, and he takes them to his childhood home to kind of let them understand where he's come from.
Yeah.
And I thought of that moment, and I do think that like one of the things that's different is usually families of color, you never are not aware of that, because your parents are constantly telling you or constantly showing you, like, whether it's relatives, extended family, or
Yeah.
your own parents, you're constantly being reminded of the sacrifices that had to be made in order for you to have the life that you have.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I feel like every person of color and every immigrant like family in America has this thing that just is constantly told over and over again that like, hey, people had to sacrifice for you to have anything. Which I have to say that like, if you're a white male, maybe that's not a lesson that has been taught to you, or you know what I mean, or maybe this idea of American exceptionalism kind of bypasses the struggle of it all. But there is a moment where like with Cory, where he gets checked in a way that I feel like a lot of privileged white kids get checked when they go to college and they experience experiences outside of their bubble. And unfortunately, that didn't really play a part in this story, but I feel like that's the link I've seen in my real life, is just like leaving your childhood home, going to a college, going to a new place, being exposed to new ideas, and then being like, oh, maybe I did have a really privileged existence. So
Absolutely. Like, because again, I think what's also very true to form is Cory's behavior when he is visiting Alan's old neighborhood.
yeah.
It's just Cory's kind of like scared and he's skittish, and it's just like, oh
I
yeah,
love when Alan's like, touch it, get some dirt on your hands. Like, come on, like, stop, be like, don't pretend like you're too good for this. Cause I wasn't. My dad wasn't. Like, I love that.
yeah, absolutely. And I really do. Even the more that we talk about it, the more I'm like, oh yeah, this is also like a rite of passage for someone who has grown up privileged, in any way, shape, or form, where you're like, oh, this could all be taken away. And I do think that the thing that's kind of different about our generation and millennials is we were the first generation to where you may not be better off than your parents. And that's just
Yeah.
something that for the 90s that was taken advantage of. It's like, oh no, you're going to be better than your parents, and you're upset that you aren't already better than your parents.
I mean, even for millennials, like even middle class millennials will like, I have a ton of friends who had a childhood room that had a house that they grew up in, but after 2008,
Yeah.
like the house was sold. So it was one of those things that like even like the most like what we would probably consider in the 90s of privileged kids, like they've had their struggles too in keeping up with what's considered average in the
Yeah.
90s. So
It's actually funny, just kind of to this note, is I was listening to something the other day that was talking about how The Simpsons has been on so long that class of people don't even exist anymore.
no.
Like
Yeah.
the blue collar worker who supports a family of six, he has
Mm-mm.
him, his wife, his three children, and his father all staying with him, and
Yeah.
he can support on that one salary. That is impossible right
Yeah.
now. And I think it's amazing to kind of see the differences in generations, and to see someone like Cory kind of take it for granted. And I like that this episode really does, for its time, check him.
100%. I want to quick, I know we're kind of like taking up a lot of time, but do you have thoughts on the talent show? Can we talk about that?
There are a few things I have on the talent show. One is that there's this moment in the beginning where we haven't seen the acts. There's this, we
I know
heard about.
exactly what we were going to talk about.
Yeah, there's a moment where the principal comes out and he's like, we've seen this, we've seen that, we've seen. Okay, let me see if I could, because I was like, what am I? The double jointed Plunkett twins. And Alan stands up and is
Gives
like,
a standing
woo!
ovation.
And I was like, okay, so there are a few things we need to talk about here.
Yep.
One, double jointed Plunkett twins would only get that kind of reaction because the idea that they are double jointed and twins, again, you have to know the context of what we're trying to do. It's
Yeah.
alluding to sexual.
It might as well be called Two Girls One Cup. Like it just
Yeah.
like it writes itself. Like it's so like. Here's my question: this is a school function, right? This is for
We
children.
just established that Morgan is 13. Like, look, what are we doing?
Who is he applauding like that for? 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds? What are we
No,
talking
I
about
don't
here?
care what age group we're talking about. Alan, what are you doing?
In front of his wife, in front of his daughter, in front of his whole family. Like, come
I
on,
was like,
Alan.
whoever
Be
wrote that,
better.
whoever wrote that like did not think 1 second about what they were actually saying.
And I love Amy's reaction of just like, "Oh, Alan,
I
perving out
was,
over
oh
kids."
God. Yeah, exactly. So there's that. Then there's this idea of we've seen talent shows on Black shows, and
Yeah,
you're like, oh, we about to get a moment. Like to this
yeah.
day, Tamara Mowry's talent show of I'm Going
I'm
Down.
going down. She kills it. It's a. I mean, there's so many great music moments on like UPN shows of that
Yeah,
era. Like
exactly.
Moesha has a ton of them.
So
Like the
when we
Parkers
get
have some
this,
great
I
ones.
just knew I was like, it's not gonna be what I need. It's not gonna give what needs to be given.
Well, hey. All right. Well, in all fairness, I'm not expecting Morgan to carry the seasoning of Sister Sister or Moesha or the Parkers, but I will say for a 13-year-old, she has a great voice. She sang a tune. She like for a child to sing, it's not easy. And like
It's not.
I give her flowers. And I also can appreciate that we are in this episode alone, we've aged Morgan so much. She's gone from coloring to, oh no, I actually play video games. Also, I like to sing. And also, I'm going to sing in this talent show. It's a lot all at once, but at least we're getting some development with this character that's often forgotten about.
I didn't think about it, but you're right. It's almost like they aged her in front of our eyes in order to be like, hey, like it's like one of those things. Every time we check in on her, she's a different age.
Yeah.
Like they were like, and we're just gonna, and now she's 16, and that's what she will be.
Yeah. But they also did her wrong by having her close the show out. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, come on, Wind Beneath My Wings, she's 13. You're going to have her follow the double jointed twins?
And the flamethrowers? Come
Come
on.
on,
Like,
she stood no chance. It does feel like the show is like incorporating, and I've kind of talked about this before, incorporating the personalities and traits of the actors into the characters. And I feel like we get that here with Lindsay and her singing. We're also going to see that with Ryder and his poetry later on, where they're just like, oh, we know these actors enough to where we're going to pull some of their personalities and intertwine them. And her singing kind of feels like that. Although I will say that both for the actress and the character of Morgan, the moment stolen by Cory immediately.
and
And like,
I'm very upset with that. I was like,
yeah,
again, he just can't seem to not make it about him. Like every single turn, Cory, the character, makes the situation about him. And it's just one of those things where it's like, it's kind of grating and it's kind of annoying because this would have been a great opportunity to let literally anyone else shine. And the fact
yeah.
that he literally shoehorns himself as the main character is yeah, grating.
And it's like, it's kind of, I feel like that's probably the weakest part of the episode too, because like, even though I do remember this scene and I remember laughing about it as a kid and thinking it was funny and everything, like it's kind of a weak resolve for how strong the episode is leading up to that. And like I actually feel like that you could have done without that performance and just had the conversation between Alan and Cory afterwards, which was just like, hey, like I'm sorry that I blamed you for my life circumstances. I realize it's on me to find my own purpose and meaning. Like he didn't have to steal Morgan's moment. They could have just had that conversation and been fine. So
Absolutely. All right. Do you want to hit on the B storyline at all?
Um, I just have like a quick overall. Like we don't need to kind of break it down really because we've seen this storyline. We've seen Eric and Jack try to hook up with Rachel. And this storyline, Eric doesn't even want to leave to use the bathroom because he's afraid that these two are gonna immediately start having sex, I guess. Jack proposes to Rachel the moment he goes to the bathroom. She starts choking. He does not care and continues to hit on her. He saves her life, which is anything a human would do for another person. And then they posit this theory that I've seen in so many sitcoms, so many cartoons. Like, I'm sick of this trope of you saved my life, so now I owe you like servitude. I owe you something so big, whatever no questions asked. And I'm just like, dude, this is such like a male fantasy trope of just like, if there's anything, and I mean anything I can do to make it up to you, it's what are we doing?
By the way, he almost let you die because he was too busy hitting on you.
That was what I was like.
There's like, again, I'm just like, as you said, it's male fantasy because I'm watching this being like, he almost let her die because he was too busy hitting on her and ignoring all of the signs. And she's still grateful. She's still like, oh my God, I owe you everything. Like, I was like, this is so ridiculous.
Also,
although
are we
I
supposed
will
to believe
say,
that when Eric comes out of the bathroom, he sees Jack railing Rachel in the middle of the kitchen. Like, what are we supposed to believe he is seeing that's upsetting him so much?
I will say, him being like, she was chucking to death. I laughed. I did laugh.
She was
Also, I
chucking to
will
death.
say that Will Friedle looks so fine in this episode. The hair is
Ooh.
that I had a turned on by Turner moment. I was like, "Ooh, I'm loving the
Wow.
hair. It's like giving everything it needs to
So
give."
this
But
is like prime Eric for you.
this
Wow.
is
Okay.
prime Eric right now, and I would think for a lot of people, that hair is doing what it needs to do.
It definitely. And I think this is the last season we get the hair. So appreciate why you have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so later on, Eric's anxiety is out of control because he feels like Jack is going to ask Rachel for a sexual favor that he feels she's going to agree to, and it's going to happen right in front of him. I don't know why. And then again, this is why the story is so meaningless that we don't even need to like talk about it. Jack asked for a PB&J, and Eric's like, "Why didn't you ask for anything more sexual?" And he's like, "Oh, I respect her and don't want to take advantage of her." And Eric's like, "Oh yeah, I respect her and don't want to take advantage of her too." Only for the episode to end with him trying to con her into kissing him.
Yeah. So again, it's I don't even know. It just feels like it's just all of this like web series type stuff. You know what I mean? It's
Yes,
just like
total web series stuff.
it's like we didn't need this. Like
Yeah.
if like why don't you just have this be its own little thing and what or like give some more meat on the bones. Like
Yeah.
for Eric to constantly be like, "Oh, every week he realizes that he respects Rachel." It's just like, okay.
Eric straight up says to Jack, he's like, Jack says, "I don't want her to feel like she owes me anything." And then Eric says, "Then why did you save her life then? Why would you do that if you didn't want to get something out of it? I don't understand."
Again, it's exhausting, and I feel like again I'm Alan. It's like, what now? Like, are we doing this again?
This is Cory and Eric both being taught lessons they've already learned and just repeating the behavior over and over again. Like that's the thing we're seeing. They're both being really wacky, and they're both like saying like, Eric relearning I need to treat Rachel like a person that I shouldn't take advantage of, and Cory realizing that the world doesn't revolve around him. Like it's a thing. And at least this
And
episode they have more fun with it.
I'll say, at least this episode, they also seem to be tired of it. Like the
Yeah.
actors, the script writers, everyone's like, "Yeah, we're doing it again, huh?" Like,
Yeah. And at least I will say that compared to earlier episodes this season, it does feel like Jack and Eric's behavior is being called out a little bit more and just being like I don't think we would have had a moment in episode 2 where Jack's like, "Oh, I respect her and don't want to take advantage of her." Like I appreciated them throwing that in there and them just kind of reiterating that they do have respect for this girl despite the fact that they're constantly trying to gaslight her into sex. So
exactly. All right. So a little bit for those who know how I feel about Jack and Eric. I do also feel like there's the moment where Eric is pretending to be dead or whatever. They come in and Rachel's like, "I don't know CPR. Jack, do you?" And Jack's like, "Oh yeah, I know CPR, baby." And they go, and then of course there's like this gay panic moment. But I will also say that I was like, it kind of would have been great, or this would have been like, again, I kind of want them to just kind of like end it a little bit early, you know, like instead of
just
your gay panic.
cut right as Eric is Jack's going in for the kiss. Yeah, that's wow.
Okay.
I think we've said everything we could possibly say about this fucking episode.
Absolutely. All right. So bruh moment. What will you say is your bruh moment?
Gosh,
you know,
I honestly didn't really have like a hardcore one that really stuck out. I think if I have to choose one, it's gonna be Alan applauding the twins at the children's talent show. That's probably gonna be my bruh moment for this episode.
that
Inappropriate.
Also very true. It was definitely something that kind of like took me out, and I was like, "Why are we doing this?"
Yeah.
I thought there were a few contenders, but I think that's the one that I was going to choose as well. Okay, what's the Feeny lesson of this episode?
The Feeny lesson. I think that the Feeny lesson of this episode, completely ignoring the B storyline, which I feel is ultimately irrelevant.
Yep.
The realization that other people are going to accomplish things on a different timeline than you, and sometimes you have to learn to be okay with that, and you have to find a purpose that means something to you and not what's meaningful to other people. Like I feel like there's something to that. Like that's what I mean. There's something to this episode where there is a great lesson that's being taught in there. It kind of gets a loss every now and then because there's a lot of wackiness, but I feel like there is something to like finding your purpose and feeling comfortable with where you're at with yourself in your life. So
I think that's kind of like what my Feeny lesson was going to be, something along the lines of being appreciative of where you're at and how far you have come as an individual, and valuing your own talents and not blaming others for you not being where you want to be. Like,
yeah.
it's just kind of like if you want to be better, then that's your journey to figure out. But don't devalue where you already are, and don't blame others for you not being there. That's kind of like where I thought, so a little like wordy, a little complex, but
well, you know what? It's great to have a complex episode to talk about. Like, it's great to actually like. This is the first time this season where I felt like, wow, this is a good episode. This has meat on its bones. This is the show that like I wanted to have a podcast about. And I don't know how many episodes we get this season, but like I'm appreciative of this one.
No, and that's what I was saying, because you had told me earlier that like you're like, they're all bombs from here, and I was like, oh really? But then I watched this episode and I was like, oh, this is kind of what I want every episode.
Yeah, I don't think they're all bombs. I just think that like it becomes, as the season progresses, it just gets more and more absurd and more off the rails. So I still feel like we're on some kind of track, but once we get to some of the, I mean, at a certain point, they recreate the entire Truman Show with Eric just trapping Jack and Rachel into a room and filming them. It gets real weird.
I totally forgot, but also kind of remembered this. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Something to look forward to. What letter grade are you giving this episode?
You know what? Honestly, I'm giving this episode an A. I really genuinely enjoyed this episode. I would rewatch it. I would show it to people. If there was like oh, I've never seen an episode of Boy Meets World, I would be fine with them watching this one.
That's good. I'm not going to grade it as high. I feel like there is a lot of filler. And I feel like the talent show, the Morgan being friends with this Amazonian 13-year-old, like all of it, I'm just like, as we said, the B storyline. Because of that, I'm gonna give it a B plus. But I loved everything that I loved about it. Like everything that was good was great. It's just that it had a lot of fat.
I do think I have a core memory stored away somewhere of watching a TGIF promo that specifically featured Cory singing in front of Morgan. Like that scene that we were just like, why is this here? I think that was one of like, oh, hey, we need something for the promos. Like the show needs to be a little sitcom-y to sell it.
And I love that you said that, because there are moments where I do watch, especially now, and I'm like, this feels like a promo moment. This feels like they wrote this in order to like have something for the trailers or have something for, it didn't feel like it was necessary, other than a studio head was like, we need this moment.
Yeah. Okay. Homework. Let's talk.
I am so excited to talk about Homework. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I don't think so, because it's a show that I picked up while we were on our hiatus. And have you ever seen the show Reservation Dogs?
Oh, I saw the pilot and I really enjoyed it. I didn't get into the rest of the show, but I did see the pilot and I liked it.
That show is another one where it's like, it's such a good show.
Really? Okay.
Like, if we want to talk about, again, like people who like their goal is to be average. Like, one of the things about Reservation Dogs is it shows indigenous natives of the US and on a reservation, and what their life is like, and what their story is. And it's something that I never thought of. But like watching it and watching their stories, it's both a love letter to indigenous culture, and while at the exact same time telling their struggles and the kind of position that the US has put them in. And it's not judgmental at all. And it's, for me, it doesn't feel like at any point in time it's taking advantage or kind of misrepresenting.
Yeah.
All of it's done with respect, but all of it's also kind of done with an honest lens. And I just
Okay.
appreciate it so much. And they handle really kind of heavy topics, such as wanting, like how indigenous culture deals with death, or how poverty, or any of these things, just like the mental weight of being in a position and a status where the country kind of doesn't care about you.
Sure.
Then also they'll do something like they have like a indigenous rapper, and it's just like it's this idea of like, the age old story of someone who was able to find success by leaning into this one trope, but then leaving everyone else behind, and what that's like.
Mm,
It's really, really funny, but like also that person, even though they left the community, they still were a member, and so they're a hero in
yeah.
the eyes of the community, because like, oh, you left and you became something. I don't know, there's, you got to watch it. There's really, really complex things, but they're great characters, and it's just like, to me, one of the best versions of a modern sitcom.
That sounds awesome. That's a great recommendation. It definitely inspires me to jump back into it because what I did watch, I really enjoyed. And I feel like I've had that a lot recently, where I've watched like a few like a few pilots, and then for whatever reason, I just got mixed up with other stuff and didn't revisit. So I'm definitely going to revisit that one.
Yeah,
Um, my homework for this week, I started watching Welcome to Wrexham. Have you seen it?
I have no idea. Oh wait, is that the one with
Okay. So Ryan
Ryan
Reynolds and
Reynolds?
and
Yeah,
Rob McElhenney from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They in real this is a true story that during the pandemic they bought a Welsh European football team or soccer team,
yeah,
knowing nothing about the sport, knowing nothing about anything. Um, and they made a documentary about it, and it's in like a few episodes. It's on Disney Plus and Hulu, and honestly, it's one of the most heartwarming things I've seen. Like everything I loved about Ted Lasso, like this is like the real life version of this. These two guys are so likable, and like they've honestly made me care about soccer when I never cared about soccer, if that means anything. Like the way that they pitched this show was Rob McElhenney, who plays Mac on It's Always Sunny. He's like, I love Philadelphia sports so much. Like the Eagles, everything. Like the Eagles winning the Super Bowl was one of the top 3 moments of my life, with my kid being born and getting married. Like, and only real sports fans will
yeah,
understand that. And
yeah,
only real sports fans will understand it has nothing to do with the sport. It has
yeah,
everything to do with the camaraderie of the town and your family.
yep,
And when I saw how passionate this town was and these fans were, that's what brought me over, is that they reminded me of Philadelphia. And like when you see like the half the show is about like soccer, but half the show is about what this town, like how the town depends on this team to do well. And
yeah,
like learning about the rules of
yeah,
European football, like of
yeah,
like I didn't realize that if you're playing in this league, if you don't play well enough, you could get kicked out of the entire league.
yeah, yeah.
What a crazy
Actually,
concept. Can you
yeah.
imagine if the Lakers didn't play well and then they ended up having to play for the minors? Like it's an
I
insane
actually think
concept.
I actually think it's a fantastic. So
Fantastic.
we're a Manchester United family here, and so I definitely am well aware of like how European football works, and the Premier League versus the
Yeah.
like all those other things, and it absolutely is very amazing. But also, it is very much life or death over there. Like
Life
they
or
took
death.
it's
Like
very, very serious.
I highly encourage you to watch at least the pilot or the first 2 episodes, because there is a game where like they come in and they've been on this losing streak, and they basically tell the team and the management like, hey guys, like you have to win this game or we're gonna have to make some changes. And to see like what that means to these individuals who have been playing in like a fifth relegated league, they make like 30,000 a year. Like this is how they support their families, and they have to play for their life. It just, the stakes are just out of control. So like I just got swept up into European football and just swept up into the show, and I really enjoyed it, and I encourage people to jump into it, because it's one of those like feel good stuff that there's not a lot of feel good entertainment out there
It's so
now.
funny because I didn't watch it, but at the exact same time, I felt like it was echoes of Ted Lasso. But
Yeah.
then I saw something. I think maybe I was like at the gym or something, and I was like, "Oh, is this like a documentary?" Like I thought it was like a sitcom, but when I watched it
Yeah.
work, I was like, "Oh, I feel like they're playing themselves. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
So just to hear you talk about it, that's very interesting. And then also just a little bit of a tangent. I too feel like it would make American football so much more interesting.
I love the concept of basketball, everything. Just throw it in there.
I think it would I think that it would kind of break up like these monopolies that we have, which is why they would never do it. But then like this idea of like, oh, yo, in reality, like if there were certain teams, like there are certain minor league teams where it's like if you had the actual chance to make it into the major, your whole team, your whole franchise has the opportunity to make it into the NFL. I feel like the stakes would be a lot higher and everyone in the US would be a lot more involved. Like right now, if your team is doing well or not, you don't really care. You're like, oh, you know, it is what it is. But if you're like, yo, if they don't make this game, they're out of the NFL. Yo, I'm watching.
I'm watching it. And I love the concept too of just like, you know, there's 23-year-olds who are getting these multi-million-dollar deals. It's like, well, okay, that's interesting that someone got 42 million for the next 6 years. But what's more interesting is that if they don't finish this game well, they're going to make $1 million less, or however the difference is. Like their pay actually depends on how well they perform. That makes the stakes higher. So again, like I got really wrapped into it, and I highly recommend it because it was definitely an easy watch as well.
Okay, cool. That's great to know. You guys, let us know what you think about that homework. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Bruh Meets World. We highly appreciate it. Keep giving us your feedback. Keep reaching out. We love, again, I will say now with Pod Meets World, we're getting a lot more enthusiastic and we're having a lot more people like kind of discuss with us. And so we are very happy if you are joining us for the first time. Continue reaching out at Bruh Meets World on all of the channels. You can find us on at Bruh Meets World on Spotify, iTunes, all of the places, and email us at bruhmeetsworld@gmail.com.
Guys, remember we're doing video episodes on YouTube as well, so make sure to like and subscribe and to share those as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Any other news? Anything else we should tell them, Siege?
I think that we should tell them to dream.
Well, I mean, if they're going to dream, then we should also imply that they try.
But that would involve them doing some good.
All right. Well, guys, you heard it. Dream, try, do good. You heard it from us first. Dream, try, do good.
Later, bro.
Later, bruh.
When the spawn meets world.